Good morning. My name is Tim Tholen, and I'm the President and CEO of Thoughtful Healthcare. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Eric Fedoni. Eric is the Director of Outreach, Recruitment, and the Education Core for the University of Kansas Alzheimer's Disease Center, as well as an Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Kansas Medical Center. And to my left, I have Michelle Needens. She is a licensed clinical social worker and is the Director of the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center My Alliance for Cognitive Health, which is a community care program focused on early detection, provider partnerships, and education. So welcome and good morning.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that today's topic is about early detection of Alzheimer's because, you know, in our work with families, that is something that we're always going over with them, is the importance of early detection so that they can plan for the eventualities. And so maybe today let's open up the conversation to talk about these early signs of dementia and move into ways that diagnosis, treatment, and lifestyle can be affected when the disease is recognized early. So maybe give me some of the concerning signs that family members might be looking for if they're noticing some changes in their family member.
Yeah, so the big thing with early cognitive changes is that it's subtle. And Alzheimer's disease affects the part of the brain where short-term memory lives first. And so what we see in the earliest stage are just subtle forgetfulness. And it might even seem normal to some degree. You know, we all forget our keys at some point. We all might miss somebody's birthday. But people ought to pay attention to that. You know, is it happening more often? So there's other things that might be affected. Sometimes individuals will begin to have more difficulty with numbers, for example, in earlier stage. We might see some word finding problems in earlier stages. But really paying attention to, is it different for the person? And that's the mark. You know, are we seeing changes that are not consistent with how the person remembered and the skill set they had before?
Okay. And when you speak about word finding challenges, are there specific, you know, nouns or verbs or proper names that may tend to be more prevalent, or is it just words in general? Words in general. I mean, I always call it the thing stage. So, you know, initially we'll see this subtle short-term memory kind of changes, and then we begin to see some of the word finding or word substitution. But you'll hear people start saying, you know, that thing we went to, you know, that thing that, and they'll start describing the word instead of saying the word. I pay attention to that. Right, right.
Sometimes we can see people losing train of thought. And, you know, there's a lot of human beings in this world that are so skilled at covering when they lose their train of thought.
Right.
But I pay attention to that. Are they tangential in some way? Have they moved from A to B to C and we've never gotten back to A? So all of those things are impacted.
Okay. And so once you're starting to notice in your family member that there are some memory issues, why is it so important for those to be checked out?
So, you know, this is a really important question.
Yeah.
And it gets at the heart of several things. It gets at the heart of how we see memory challenges as a society. It gets at the heart of our comfort in having conversation with people with cognitive challenges. So when, you know, when we notice changes, there should never, ever, ever be an assumption, oh my gosh, this person's 80 years old, so of course they have Alzheimer's disease and we don't need to worry about that. It's just natural progression of aging. Our minds should never go there. So there's lots of reasons why someone might have memory problems. Some of those are reversible. So some of those reversible issues, you know, could be, you know, metabolic disorders, could be depression, could be thyroid dysfunction, could be vitamin deficiencies, could be brain tumor. I mean, there's a number of things that it could be, and that should be paid attention to. Mm-hmm. And even if it's an irreversible cause, there are more options than just Alzheimer's. and they all have a different sequence, and so we should approach them differently
Right.
In some way. I always say, you know, if someone had stomach problems and said to you, gosh, I'm having stomach problems, there's nobody in this world that would say, oh, well, we all have stomach problems, you know, don't worry about it. We would say, have you seen your doctor? And that conversation should happen when you're talking about brain changes. So we want to understand the cause so we can figure out the approach.
Right. And one of the things that we see in our care for families is if there is a change, we just look for something as simple as a urinary tract infection or infection of some sort could be causing the confusion. And it could be as simple as that.
Delirium is so common in older adults. Now, with something like Alzheimer's disease, it's not just older adults.
Right.
We see people at younger ages, but the majority of people with Alzheimer's disease are older in age, and delirium is quite common. And yes, can be caused by infectious process or polypharmacy or certain types. There's certain medication that is more impactful in terms of cognition. Substance abuse, which we don't think about with older adults, but is alive and well. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of reasons why we might see this delirium, this acute descent into a confusion, which is a acute medical problem that can provoke death if not attended to.
Right. Okay. Now, if you go to your doctor, or excuse me, if you feel that there might be some cognitive changes coming on, what are the first steps that a family member should do?
So the first step is to have a conversation with primary care.
Okay.
Some primary care providers are very comfortable with dementia, have interest in dementia, and may opt to evaluate from there. And we really support those primary care providers increasingly taking the lead in terms of diagnosis. There are some primary care providers who do not feel comfortable with diagnosis and might refer on to neurology. And there might also be specific reasons why primary care providers think neurology needs to be involved, especially if there's more complexity to the picture. But the first step is mention it to primary care. And I'm going to say one other thing about that is if you believe there to be a problem, do not be talked out of it. If there is a concern, advocate for yourself and the person that you're supporting, you know, to investigate what that reason is. Do not accept less than a thorough evaluation. You know, just because someone's a certain age does not mean we don't pay attention to it.
Right. And is it sometimes helpful to have an extended family there with you when you start taking those first steps to make sure that they're involved?
Yes. So this is just like any serious concern, we're talking about family issues. Mm-hmm. And very important to include family from the very beginning. It will make a world of difference through the entire course of the disease if we operate as a team, rather than an island, rather than being ashamed, rather than hiding. If it's out in the open and family is included.
Yeah. You know, in some of the other video series we've talked about early diagnosis and the importance of it in planning for what's coming, because with Alzheimer's there's going to be some eventualities in your life that you need to be prepared for, and family members being involved is one of the ones that we see all the time. So that's very important. Speaking of family, how do you approach the family member that you have concerns about and who is showing these signs? What's the appropriate way in which to start that conversation?
So this is a bit of a tricky one, and it's tricky for multiple reasons, partly because we're all different human beings with different coping strategies and different relationships. So part of the answer lies in the kind of relationship and individuals involved. We would like to say that, you know, if you are in a family environment where there is an openness, where there is an opportunity for conversation, when you hear someone talking, expressing concerns about memory, or when you notice them, to absolutely share with them directly. and to say I'm seeing changes. Could be a lot of different things, and I think we need to have conversation with a physician to figure out what's going on. I think important to integrate the language of the person. So, surprise, surprise, there are individuals that are not so open, and relationships that are more complicated.
Right.
And so I think it's important to think through who that person is and the language and the context of their philosophy. And by that I mean, to say, you taught me how to, handle problems in a certain way, or, and I hope this is how we're going to approach this. Or, if they've been a fix-it kind of person, to use that language. Let's see what we can fix. Let's see the parts that we can fix. And to really support that idea that knowing is empowering, it's not disabling.
Mm-hmm.
I often will use analogies. There's lots of analogies. I mean, would you want to know if you had a hearing problem? Would you want to understand why you had a hearing problem? Why is that? Well, because there might be a way to fix it. There might be a way to treat it. There might be compensatory skills that would need to be incorporated for you to manage. So match the language and match the conversation based on who the person is and their philosophy.
And is it sometimes helpful if you are getting that resistance from the person that you have concerns about to maybe express to them that this will help me help you?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So sometimes it's about I'm worried, and it may not be anything at all, but it's scaring me. And if you would just do this for me, and then if it's nothing, we can set that aside.
Right. Okay, that makes more sense.
Most of us would do almost anything for people we love.
You're right.
It's ourselves that we neglect.
Right. The I'm okay, you'll be okay syndrome, I call that. It's at times when we're talking to families.
Yeah.
So now we've gotten to the point where we've convinced the person that there might be some memory challenges coming on. We need to get this looked at. What does a dementia evaluation look like? I mean, how does that process work?
Yeah, so a thorough dementia evaluation is comprised of a number of pieces. Key in that is a thorough clinical history, is a brain scan. Typically in this day and age it's an MRI, and neuropsych testing. There are other things that go into that, the blood work, lab work, where we're trying to rule out things. Once in a while we'll see an EEG. There might be other additional components that are added, but those basic elements, the history, the brain scan, the neuropsych testing, and essentially a thorough physical are the key elements. And with that, we see a pretty high accuracy rate. There are actually more advanced scanning. Those kind of more advanced scanning measures are used in the research world, are not necessarily used in the clinical world at this point, but important to have all those pieces. So when somebody comes to me and says they've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or a dementia, I always ask them how.
Okay.
Because if they've been diagnosed based on 5 minutes, a mini mental status exam, what day is it, and where are you and who's the president, then they might need a more expanded evaluation.
And who does the neuropsych testing? Is that the primary or the neurologist, or is that somebody in your field?
So none of that. It's a neuropsychologist.
Okay.
So in places like the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center Memory Clinic, we have a neuropsychology team that helps with that. Most neurologists are affiliated with neuropsychologists that do that testing. And that testing is really important because the brain scan can give us this very objective sense of here's where the damage is in the brain, here's what's going on in the brain, but the neuropsych testing can help us really look at function. And as a person that walks beside families every day, as they go through this. I am really, I think it's imperative we understand function. What is it what are the parts that people retain? What are the parts that work? And when we understand that, both what's deficit and what works, then we can figure out what are the next steps. Is driving, for example, something that can be safely done? Financial management, is that something that we need to have a plan about? Is depression a significant player here? So I think it's essential that we look both at what's wrong but also what's right and build our plan from there.
Okay. And roughly how long does a neuropsych evaluation take?
It's really dependent on the neuropsychologist. Some of the time there are models that allow them to do some of that testing in as short as a couple of hours, and there are neuropsychologists who 4 to 6 hours of testing. And part of that likely depends on the complexity of the neurologic picture, what we're asking.
I think the neuropsych testing and the brain scans and all the sort of fancy things that we have now in healthcare are really important, but in dementia evaluation, our clinicians really still continue to focus on a good history. And going back to the earlier discussion about the importance of having a family member or someone who knows you really well, that's what our clinicians at the KU Memory Clinic still want to hear. They want to know from a loved one's perspective or someone who knows the person really well, what has changed, as Michelle said, and what hasn't. And that's still the #1 piece we use. It's kind of old-fashioned doctoring, but it's very high diagnostic accuracy, as Michelle said.
So when you say clinical history, expand on that a little bit. What are they looking for?
Just in terms of if someone has always had trouble with names and continues to have troubles with names, just because they're older now doesn't mean that this is a dementia-related change or a cognitive-related change. So we really need to know what a person's been capable of and always had struggles with, and then we're looking for change.
Gotcha.
Or our clinicians are always looking for that kind of thing. And there's no substitute for that kind of history. In fact, we don't typically use a brain scan, for example, for a diagnosis. It's oftentimes for rule out or to find alternative explanation for things like a brain tumor or something like that.
Okay, that's interesting. So what do we know about the early stages of Alzheimer's? I mean, it's kind of a paradigm shift, it seems, over the last 5 to 6 years about Alzheimer's and the growth, or not the growth of it, the progression of it, but more and more research has been done into the early stages and preventing or recognizing earlier on. What do we know about the early stages? What does it look like?
So absolutely there has been a change. I would say really in the last 25 years or so, we began understanding more about early stage. And over time, we have come to realize that the markers of Alzheimer's disease even start 10 years before the first symptom began. And so we understand this is a very subtle disease process, and that we have to be more attuned to what early stage might look like. Not, I think society by and large, and often portrayed in the media, when people have Alzheimer's disease, it's individuals who have lots of impairment. And that impacts how we see it, that impacts when we go in to be evaluated, all of those kind of things. So we have to get in our minds that it's going to be subtle. Depression is often part of the early game, and gosh, if, for those families that are dealing with Alzheimer's disease, we have to be very skilled at recognizing depression, both prior to diagnosis, sometimes concurrent with diagnosis, sometimes part of the biology as some of the brain destruction happens, and certainly as some of the coping strategies are become more and more unavailable to the person through the disease process. If we want to keep someone as well as they can be, as long as they can be, we're going to have to pay attention to what depression looks like in this disease and the role that it plays in disability.
Yeah, and that depression not only is in the individual that's been diagnosed, but also the immediate family Certainly there's a spouse.
Yeah, it's a mirror image.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we look at these very high rates of depression in the person with the disease, it's almost exactly matched in care partners. So almost if you affect one, you affect the other. And that's because we are so used to, in our mind, equating Alzheimer's disease as disability. Now, I'm not saying that there is not a progression to Alzheimer's disease. There is. There are losses in Alzheimer's disease. And so grief is inherent. But, you know, it's also a very slow disease. There are abilities that remain, and there are strategies that we can incorporate that allow people to be as well as they can, as long as they can, as independently as they can.
Right.
And those are the strategies we need to have in place. I was talking with a caregiver just the other day. Her husband has Alzheimer's disease, bumping into what I would consider middle stage. We were talking about her as a care partner, and she said, you know, I want you to know that my marriage is stronger now than it ever has been.
Wow.
You know, we can grow as human beings.
Right.
That does not stop because we have Alzheimer's disease. And, you know, when we think of the power of feelings throughout the disease, and how that can change family dynamics, what we expose, how that changes our priorities. Don't think for a minute that some of that good stuff can happen. And I tell families virtually every day, the more we know about biology, the more we see miracles. I mean, look for the exceptions. Don't just focus our minds on what is lost. Otherwise, we all end up in some despairing posture.
Right. Well, that's a good point. It's kind of the reason why we get help. You know, grief counseling is very important. I know that personally. Well, this kind of leads into the next discussion: is why is it so important to be diagnosed early? I mean, I know there's a medical component, there's a family component, there's a planning component. Maybe we can touch on some of those important reasons to look for early diagnosis.
Yeah. So some of the reasons. So Alzheimer's disease in the middle stage begins to affect executive function, insight, etc. So when we delay diagnosis, we are not giving the person experiencing the cognitive decline the chance to address some of those compensatory measures which could have made life easier. It's not giving the person with the disease the chance to, what I consider, stay in control. You know, we equate Alzheimer's disease with losing control. You diagnose early, you stay in control. I can tell you what I want. I can instruct my family.
Right.
I can use what I have for the greater good. I can be an advocate. You know, we talk about research. Most research opportunities are not going to be there for people in middle, late stages. There are research opportunities for those folks. They are fewer.
Yeah.
And so if I'm diagnosed with a serious disease, do I want to take part in research? Do I want to be included in experimental medication, for example? Heck yes, I do. Don't take that right away from me.
Right.
By recognizing late. I want to do whatever I can. So even participating in research is part of that. But just psychologically, I think, making peace with who I am. You know, we go through all kinds of changes in this life. And there are many places in life where you look back and say, did I do it all right? And somewhere along the way, our answer has to be yes. We did it the best we could.
Right.
And that person with the disease needs that chance to you know, I visited a person, again, early stage, cantankerous fellow. We probably all know a few of those. You know, and the first thing he said to me when I walked in is, are you going to make this worse? That was his first words to me. So, you know, we have a conversation, you know, about his philosophy of life. He was a business person. He kind of took the bull by the horn, you know, and really thinking through how could this be meaningful in integrating his children, you know, and allowing them to be part of this with him. no other intervention other than this conversation of dynamic with his children. At the end of the conversation, he said, "You're leaving me more hopeful."
That's wonderful.
So give the person with the disease a chance for themselves to make peace, for their family, for planning, for the world in research and advocacy. There's a lot of important reasons. And we also think some of the interventions that we currently have are likely more successful in early stage. That the medication, for example, there may be a period of time in the disease where they're less efficacious or functionally less meaningful. So some of those interventions likely would be stronger if we diagnosed in early stage. And then lastly, this idea about compensatory measures. So, back to anything. If we're, if I had a learning disability, for example, would it be important for me to know even if that learning disability was not changeable? The answer is yes. Why is that? Because I could change my environment, I could adapt. I see lots of folks who have struggled in the workplace, knowing they're having memory problems, not being diagnosed, getting fired, having financial consequences, where if we could have diagnosed earlier, we could have stopped some of that sequence. I remember many friends in the early stage who would say, my workday doubled. I went from 9 hours a day to 16, 18 hours a day. I would double check all of my work, and I don't want anybody to know. How much pressure that is for someone. How freeing it is. The shame of not being able to tell other people. And there's always this issue when you're diagnosed. Who do I tell? How do I tell? Who do I want to know? And when people start telling others in their world, honest to goodness, there's a burden lifted. They don't have to hide it. And most of the time, other people in their orbit already have an idea.
Right.
So there's this freeing posture.
I can understand that. From the research perspective, we kind of touched on it, and we'll touch on it a little bit later, but the importance of early diagnosis in the research world, maybe you could talk a little bit about what it is you are looking for.
Sure. Just briefly, we've tried for many years now to treat people with kind of the maybe early but more middle stage.
Right.
And we just have not hit the right target yet. And so the field in the last 5 to 7 years has really shifted more towards early intervention at the very first signs of cognitive change, memory and thinking change, things that we call mild cognitive impairment, for example. And I think there's a huge focus now on prevention as well. And that's some of the pieces that we're learning in terms of risk factors, that many of the things that we already have good interventions for can reduce our risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. And if we kind of take that to the extreme, one of the epidemiologists would suggest that if we can delay onset by 5 years of cognitive change, we can cut the number of Alzheimer's disease diagnoses in half.
Wow.
So it's really now, our field has really shifted to a focus on very early intervention before a dementia diagnosis like Alzheimer's or FTD or something like that, and even to the point where nobody's to intervening in a time frame where nobody's experiencing cognitive change.
Okay, so that sums it up. So how do you respond to others with concerns about a diagnosis of dementia?
So there's lots of folks who don't even realize there may be a problem. So if you have somebody in your world who says to you, gosh, I'm forgetting all the time anymore, or I'm not thinking like I used to, or I'm getting old, or these kind of things, rather than take that at face value, to begin the conversation by saying, are you really worried about it? Because then that shifts the burden from you back to them. They have the option of saying no and not engaging in that conversation. But we have an obligation to other people to take those concerns seriously. I had a conversation just yesterday with a a person that's a teacher, and she was talking about a coworker, and she has noticed that there is some changes, and the teacher said to her, you know, I'm getting just like my mom. And the coworker she was talking with had no idea how to address that. But the answer would have been, you know, what's similar about your mom? The chances are she's talking about I'm becoming forgetful, you know, as her mom did. So to say, are you really worried about that? And to let people know, gosh, it could be a lot of things, direct them to a physician to have it checked. You ought to have that checked out. There might be other explanations for that kind of thing. So really to open up that conversation with them and direct them to a physician. And if they've seen one, said, I talked to my doc and he said I didn't need to worry about it, say, well, if you're still concerned, get a second opinion.
Right.
You know, it might be important.
Okay. A lot of times when we're working with families, when there is that early diagnosis and there's obviously a change in the house because they're scared and they don't know what to do, but that's something that's common for you in your work with a much wider population than I'm working with. What are some of the messages that those that are being early diagnosed could say to others out there to provide some sort of comfort or help or guidance? Things that you're hearing.
Yeah, I think what they offer is about insight, because most people start at a place of fear, of panic, of catastrophic thinking. You know, we have this habit as human beings to jump to the worst case scenario.
Right.
And so my friends in early stage would say, you know, seek support early. They would say, you know, educate yourself on what it means. So those individuals that come in and talk with me who are, one, feeling suicidal, or who are making erratic financial decisions because they think they're going to be severely impaired in a short period of time, it's not true. So let's think through and process some of those myths and get education.
Yeah.
You know, include family. Don't put your head in the sand, and let's start thinking through changes to be made. That there are some things that you can participate in and advocate, and that you can be a model for other people. You know, be involved in support groups. We don't have many early stage support groups in this community, but we have a couple. So in the Kansas City area, the Alzheimer's Association, Heart of America chapter has an early stage group, and KUADC has started an early stage group in partnership with Church of the Resurrection. And so be part of those support groups. Learn from one another who understand where it's been.
Good, interesting. Well, those are good words. You know, Eric, what are some of the proactive responses that on the research side or the medical side of this that could come about that you might be able to speak to?
So the first thing that the head of our memory care clinic always stresses when he's out in the community, Dr. Jeff Burns, is we view dementia as treatable. We don't have a cure yet, but we have effective treatments for most people. So that's the first kind of message we always want to say. This is treatable. And then beyond that, then is we believe there are 5 good pillars of brain health that people can benefit from, regardless of whether or not they have cognitive change. The first one, close to my heart, because that's the kind of research that I do, is exercise. And I know people often get turned off by exercise, but it is so valuable for function. We are creatures of movement. We love to move, and we feel better when we move. Michelle and I often talk about this. So exercising at some level in some way is always very important. Then there's a heart-healthy diet. We're finding more and more out about good diets like Mediterranean diet or diets that you'd follow for blood pressure are always really important to help maintain good brain health. We really believe in staying socially and cognitively engaged. So that may be learning something new, or going out and being part of Bible study or book club, things like that. Always maintaining social engagement. And then a new one that a lot of people are very focused on right now is getting good sleep. It seems to be very critical for brain health. Obviously for everyone, it's great, but it does seem to be critical for brain health. And I think that's true both of caregivers and care partners and people who are having some cognitive change. In fact, it's one of the things that we do what we call a differential diagnosis on. We want to make sure that you don't have sleep apnea, for example, or really poor sleep if you're experiencing cognitive changes, because that's something that would be very treatable that may not be related to dementia or a dementing process. So.
Expand a little bit about the diet. You hear about the Mediterranean diet. What exactly is that? Higher in natural fats or lower in carbs?
I'm not the best person to answer all of these, but yes, it is. It's a little bit of both of those. It's lean meats, lots of fruits and vegetables, and nuts, things like that. So it reduces. It's a significant reduction in red meat and fatty meat intake.
Just for personal curiosity, the rates of dementia diagnosis around the world, are they higher in developed countries like ours with less than desirable dietary habits and lower in Mediterranean style countries? I don't know if that's data's out there.
A little bit, although it is, it's not, by no means is it, kind of clearly definitive what's the best culture. For example, Japan has very high rates because they live a long time.
Yeah.
So they have. So it's not clear that you're disadvantaged if you grow up in the States versus somewhere else.
Just curious. So what are some of the current research opportunities that are available at the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center?
So we actually have about 24 ongoing clinical trials where we're investigating various interventions. And then we also have maybe 10 to 15 other what we call innovation and discovery studies, where we're learning more about the disease, learning more about risk factors. There's a lot of interest in, for example, insulin right now and how that affects the brain and plays a role in how diabetes interacts with the disease. And so we have studies on that. So you can get involved at almost any level you want, from coming in for a visit once, or coming in once a year to get a brain evaluation or a memory evaluation, to being in a 2-year study where we really work on your blood pressure to kind of reduce your risk for dementia and see if that has an outcome of cognitive benefit or Alzheimer's risk reduction. And we have studies for everyone from who have normal cognition all the way to moderate stage dementia. And we have studies that are unrelated to medicines or exercise, things like that. We have caregiver studies, and we actually even have caregiver programs that are unrelated to research at all, that Michelle and I have been running for the last couple of years.
Where is the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center in relation, or on the national scale, in terms of its, I don't know what the word is, but its visibility?
Sure. So the Alzheimer's Disease Center is one of 31 NIA, National Institutes on Aging, centers of excellence, designated centers of excellence. So we're part of this network of 31 centers across the country, and we all work together to find cures, and we also support the educational and research environment in our region. And so that automatically kind of puts us on a high stage. It's an incredible resource for people in the community here to have in their backyard.
Yeah.
We are beginning to improve our outreach to the surrounding region and rural communities. And we attract national talent, and I think we're very well known for our exercise specifically. Dr. Burns has had many exercise studies, and now people come seek us out to be part of their exercise studies. And so we're on a couple of what we call multi-site, where it's maybe run by a different university like University of Pittsburgh, but we're a critical piece of it.
Okay. Maybe you could, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add, so when we think of the exercise piece and diet piece, et cetera, and we think about the relationship to certain ethnicities. So if you're African American, you have double the chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. If you are Latino, you have 1.5 times the chance. And there's some understanding that part of that is related to cardiovascular risk factors. And so some of these studies, so I say to folks, we need to pay attention to those issues too, and be as proactive as possible.
Okay, that's a very Doubled, really, that's amazing. What are some of the future medical drugs that are coming out there that are being researched that show some promise?
So there are two proteins or changes in the brain that we've been focusing on the last 20 or so years. One is called amyloid, and one is called tau or tangles, plaques and tangles, if you will. And we've actually gotten very good at being able to attack those plaques. And we're starting now to be able to investigate drugs that attack the tangles as well. We've been striking out on the plaques, although there were some fairly recent early phase trials for plaques that showed some promise. So we're in the middle of doing a kind of definitive test of that, and then we're just really now starting to think about how to attack those tangles. I will say though that just I think 2 weeks ago, some very exciting news came out, and it's from a study called Sprint Mind. The original idea behind Sprint was to control blood pressure, and then they went ahead and got some money to look at cognitive change. And they found, this was the first time we've found a very clear signal that controlling blood pressure can actually reduce incidence of cognitive change. So very exciting. It's very different than the plaques and tangles that everybody's been focused on, but doing something as simple as aggressively controlling your blood pressure with your doctor seems to have some real tangible brain benefits.
So it sounds like you're moving the research and the diagnosis upstream, so to speak, before there's cognitive change. Let's address it, in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, roughly, before. So it sounds like that's where the look forward is moving.
Absolutely.
In terms of prevention.
Prevention, yeah. We have not been successful at finding treatments for moderate stage in the kind of investigational drug world, and so we're really looking now at early stage, which we've been talking about.
Right. Interesting.
And again, when you're talking about the increase in medicines, and I'm not going to say these numbers correctly, but when you look at where we were with phase 2 and phase 3 trials 10 years ago, and the number of drugs that made it to phase 2 and phase 3, I want to say it was something like 7. And in present day, the drugs in phase 2 and phase 3, 40-some.
Really?
So, even the reflection of the medication pipeline, you see the impact of increasing energy on understanding Alzheimer's disease and what those answers might be, which also drives us to the need for more research participants.
Yeah.
That's part of the difficulty with finding answers. We need people to participate in research. We need people to step up and say, gosh, I'm going to be part of the answer, whether it be observational or whether it be medication or these lifestyle projects that Eric is talking about.
So it sounds like you need several different inputs into this. You've got the need for research and early detection and getting people involved, but there's a funding aspect to this too. Where are we on funding? I know it's a scary thing looking forward 15, 20, 25 years. What's the funding environment right now?
Gosh, that's yet another very encouraging aspect to this. So, at one time, the bird flu got more research dollars than Alzheimer's disease.
Really?
Oh, yes. And in the last 3 years, the research funding has been doubled. So we're in this polarized, partisan environment, and Alzheimer's disease is decidedly nonpartisan.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody understands that this is the one disease that will bankrupt the Medicare-Medicaid system, and that we have to pay attention to this. So there's been a lot of energy in research funding.
Absolutely.
And who's driving that? I mean, is that a congressional thing, or is that the Alzheimer's Association through the lobbying efforts? Where does that come from?
I think multi-source. I think part of it is congressional. I think we've had some Kansas leadership in that, and Missouri leadership too. I mean, there's been senators that took the lead. I think the disclosure, and this goes back to early detection and the power that can happen when you acknowledge the disclosure of Dennis Moore, for example, having Alzheimer's disease, and his friends in Congress, like Jerry Moran and others, stepped up to the plate. But I really think it's multifactorial. I think it's us as family members. You know, there's not any one lobbyist that's going to make this change. It's all of us going to make this change. We talk to our legislative representatives, and we share what's important, that this has got to be a disease in which we find meaningful answers for.
Right.
So it's the legislature, it's all of us as individuals who take an active role in making a difference, and it's the researchers and certainly some of those advocacy groups like the association.
Moving on to other groups or other sources of opportunities for people to address the disease. We've talked about the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center in specifics, what it does, and from the research and the social work side. What are some other avenues for information and support and places to go for not only for family members but also for people that have been diagnosed?
So what are specific kind of activities? What are
support
some
groups? I mean, volunteering, education.
So there's lots of support opportunities and what I would consider action opportunities. So as we talked about, there are support groups. In the early stage support groups, whether it be at the Alzheimer's Association or the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center, in both cases, we ask to talk to people before they come to support group. I think it's really important that people are prepared to walk in the door in a support group. Most people attend, if we don't have these conversations, they'll attend support group once or twice and not show up again. They'll say, oh my gosh, this is not for me, whether you're a care partner or a person with early stage. So we want to have those conversations ahead and make sure you're prepared before you step in the door. So there's what we call a informational conversation that happens before you come to support group. If you are a care partner and you have someone in your life that has early stage Alzheimer's disease and they're not going to address it, they refuse to address it, I encourage those care partners to continue to look at coming to support groups for care partners.
Yeah.
Really important whether your loved one is active in the game. If your care partner is not going to take the proactive stance that we advocate for, still important for you to attend. There's education, and there's education all over the place. There's education at KU ADC for individuals with early Alzheimer's, and there's education through Alzheimer's Association. There's lots of places for community education, and we are absolutely okay about even just giving us a call and having those conversations. We're willing to talk with folks in the community about their individual situations. Our speech therapy department has a educational series for individuals with mild cognitive impairment, looking at some of those compensatory measures that we talked about. What's the tricks and tips, and what are things that can help us remain functional and active? So that series will happen again in April, I think. So you can call and talk to us about the MCI early stage education programs. And then volunteering, there may be opportunities. We look for individuals to be with mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's to be on the Speakers Bureau, to talk about what their experience is in being diagnosed and that kind of thing. So there may be opportunities in that way too.
Okay. Just to clear up maybe some confusion for people that are just new to this, we use the term Alzheimer's, or the term Alzheimer's is so narrowly focused because that's a specific diagnosis, but could you speak a little bit about where it lies in relation to other forms of diagnosed dementia, whether from the medical side or the social work side?
Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. So, you know, if we looked at it in a chart, it would say dementia of the probable Alzheimer's type. And that's about 70% of all dementias. So the majority of dementias are indeed the Alzheimer's form of dementia, but there are others. You know, vascular dementia, so individuals that have had mini strokes, for example, or other vascular changes in the brain. Lewy body, which is a hybrid of Parkinson's that affects the cognitive being as well as physical manifestations at the very outset. Frontal temporal dementia, and there's a couple of types of those. So there are other types of dementias, some of which are mixed, so not unusual to see Alzheimer's and vascular. But important to know the type because the trek through the disease process is different. And, you know, we're not about the end game. We're about living, thriving, doing well as we go through this. So anticipating what those changes are and avoiding stepping in those pitfalls is important. So understanding what type of dementia you have is important. We see folks at the ADC with all types of dementia. Yeah. We're not just Alzheimer's.
Okay, that's an important part.
So it doesn't matter what type of dementia. You know, there's an answer and there's a place.
Are there research studies going on for those other forms of dementia?
There are a few. Alzheimer's sort of seems to be the rallying cry that people can get behind, and certainly the most common form. But we do have a few studies that allow people with other forms of dementia in. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, at the ADC, we also have a frontal temporal dementia support group. So FTD is a pretty tough dementia and certainly has a different sequence than Alzheimer's disease. By and large affects younger people. And so, you know, there is a specific support group for that particular type of dementia. And the Parkinson's Foundation also has programs for those with Lewy body dementia. So regardless of the type of dementia, there's a place.
Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating. Well, I think we can start to wrap this up and come to sort of a conclusion before we open it up to some questions. That I think we can say that science is developing to the point where we're moving the diagnosis earlier and seeking out reasons for the development of Alzheimer's, and that the social work side of it, the human factor, is so important because it is a disease that impacts so many different people. So I think we can just say that this has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Are there any questions that we can ask?
What tips or advice do you have for caregivers of people who have Alzheimer's?
So the tips for individuals with Alzheimer's would be, number one, fully understand the disease course. So learn as much as you can about the disease, not from that stance of understanding all the debility, but understanding how to cope and to manage some of the changes that occur. Two, get support. And some of you have natural support systems, people in your lives that have walked through this before and can be a support. Some of you need more formal supports like support groups, but make sure that you're not trying to do this alone. That is the greatest mark of longevity in managing this disease is how early is help integrated. We think, gosh, we can do it on our own, we can do it on our own. Those individuals that attempt to do that are likely going to be in a crisis earlier and perhaps have to look at alternative living arrangements earlier. So the tricks and tips are make sure you're integrating help earlier. And then the other piece I would say is let's move to the correct comparison. So as care partners of someone we love, sometimes our mind goes to the comparison of their abilities before the diagnosis. And I say let's compare to the disease and understand what is right in the moment. Look for those opportunities where there's good things together, experiences together, and do not live in that comparison. Big things are, don't do it alone. Pay attention to depression in yourself and in the person that you're supporting and loving. If you do those things, guess what? There's a way to navigate through this.
Wonderful. Well, we are about out of time, so thank you both again for being here. This has been very informative. I'm sure our audience will have gotten a lot of information out of it, and I want to thank you again, and we will say goodbye.
Thank you.
And for more information, if you'd like, you can go to kualzheimer.org, or you can call 913-588-0555 and select option 1. Thank you very much.